This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
I want to just mention there's also water here in cups, and there's a calendar of the RVML events at the back as you go out. And I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing to make that sound. And there's also a list of the classes that I offer back there for kids on one side, and you flip it over, and teens and adults. So you all came to find out about transition towns. And I'm going to sneak over here so I can control the computer. But before we begin, I want... There's a genie in the mic.
Bruce will straighten it out. Let's see if we...
Is it this?
No. That's...
It's a very temperamental mic.
Jewelry and mics typically don't get along with their
Well, we
proximity.
can take care of that.
But if that's not hitting it, then that should
It wasn't hitting it,
Okay.
but we'll just take it off. There we go.
Beautiful spirals.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so getting back to this, I wanted to invite you all. If you notice the title of the talk is Resilient Ashland. And there's a lot of research that goes on right now, that's going on in many different places all over the world. And that's part of the things we're going to be talking about tonight is how can each community become more resilient so that as we look at some of the challenges that are coming down the road, we can weather those and, in fact, thrive through them. So because it's based on our relationships with each other, I want to invite you to just take a moment to look at each other. See who's in the room with you. So just make eye contact with everybody. This is our community for the evening. And we'll get to play a little bit more later on. So we can pretend this is Ashland. Okay? So we're going to do a PowerPoint. Bear with me. Some of the slides will go to a YouTube video that hopefully all of the wires are connected properly. And I just need to know if it's loud enough. So if it's not in the back, let me know, okay? Okay, so we'll start. The challenges that we're looking at, we'll get into detail, but I just wanted to give you an idea from the title of the talk. We're looking at energy, climate, population, and economic uncertainty. I recently took a permaculture class, and one of the teachers came up with this beautiful word that I wanted to share with you, and it's called re-indigenate. And I think the questions he asked were really pertinent to how we become a tighter community and become more resilient. And the reason I really resonated with the word re-indigenate is that I realized I never indiginated myself in the first place. I was born in California, but most of my family background and connection is with people in Europe. So even though I grew up here, that's the connection. And I know I'm not alone. And then I moved to Oregon. I moved to Ashland 22 years ago. But I bring all of that with me. And when I think about what does it mean to be indigenous to an area, how do I fit into our systems here that we have set up? And the view that's unique to this area. And the truth is, I don't know. And that's what I realized. So I invite us to just start looking at that. Transition town is a term that's been bandied around, and it comes from a man named Rob Hopkins, and one of his books is out there in the back on the table, and I invite you to look at it during the break. But basically, he was looking at how do we face the challenges that are coming up, And so he asked, how do we do this? How do we look at significantly building resilience and also reducing our carbon emissions in the process? And basically he said, oh, well, we have to relocalize. We have to deal with energy, food, manufacturing, and economics. This is the what's written on their website when you go to the Transition Town website. And I just love it because it's so light. With a heavy dose of not knowing, they say, we are here to inspire, encourage, network, support, and train communities as they consider, adopt, adapt, and implement the transition model. And we'll get into that soon. And then this statement, I just love. Transition model emboldens communities to look peak oil and climate change squarely in the eye and unleash the collective genius of their own people. And that's what really drew me to this model, and that's why I'm sharing it with you today. And this is the big question they ask. Whoops, excuse me, I don't have that in here. What they asked was, how do we face those challenges? And actually, these slides are out of order. The one before that was answering it by going into those relocalization in those 4 areas. So the common challenge that we're looking at, that they in particular were looking at, is peak oil. And how many people here are familiar with that term? Great. So I'm going to show you the best 2-minute introduction to peak oil I've ever found. And it's on YouTube. You're welcome to go to it. I'll give you the URL if you ever want to share this with people. And we just need to connect. Okay, let's see if that's going. There we go. Okay, so that's a bit dramatic. The mountain doesn't quite look like that, and it's not about peak oil production. It's about easily obtainable oil, cheap oil. This is a more accurate drawing of, and this is based on what we're figuring out in 2004. Rob Hopkins, when he was looking at this, he said, well, you know, the way we do this, we make it a mountain, and you know, we have, as humans, we all figure when you make it to the top of the mountain, you've really gotten there. You're on top of the mountain, right? So he said, there's something wrong with this picture, because at the peak of production, of cheap production, maybe we're not at the top of the mountain, at the the pinnacle of success. So he said, well, let's change that. And he decided that this might be a better picture. So this is the story, he says. He says, oh, in the 1930s, 20s, 30s, we found this big pond of oil. And we said, oh, as a human race, let's dive in and explore. And so we swam all around, and eventually we got right to the bottom. And what we noticed is that it was really murky and dark and yucky. And we looked up, and we said, oh, the clean air and the sunshine is up there, not down here. So we pushed off the bottom and swam out. And so that's his scenario of the peak oil mountain. Basically, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but I just want to show you some of the figures that contribute to that picture. And this is based on, I think, 2006 numbers. The first circle you see is our consumption in the US, and the second one is our production and the percentage. And if you'll notice, only 10% is renewables, and this was 2 years ago. Wind was 4% and solar was 1%. So these are some of the issues we'll be looking at.
Can you go back to that again, please?
I'm not sure if I can without stopping and starting over again. Let me see. Yeah, see, it's already gone to that one. Let's try one more time. It's not obeying me. Okay. So what we're going to do is this. And there you go. Okay. Okay. So how many here have heard of the farm in Tennessee? Okay, so you've heard of Albert Bates then. And Albert Bates wrote a wonderful book called The Post-Petroleum Survival Guide and Cookbook, which is, there's a copy of it out there too. And you're welcome to look through it. And basically he says, you know, we don't have a choice of whether we're going to decline. It's whether we're going to do it with grace or with violence. And it's because a lot of the basic assumptions that we have made as a society, and this is worldwide, are no longer proving to be true. So, what does that mean to us in Ashland? Well, if we have declining supply, rising demand, that means higher oil prices, which we're already experiencing, supply volatility. And basically what it means is that minor events, relatively minor events, can have major repercussions. So if you picture, you know, dropping a stone into a still pond, those wakes are going to be a little rougher. And it could be a very small stone that starts them off. So it behooves us then to look at how can we be resilient? How can we ride that? And there's a few factors that go into this. In our culture, basically, we assume that oil is an essential input. We have it everywhere. It's an assumed input. We have actually designed our systems around oil, and almost all of our systems, in fact. And because we designed them around oil specifically, they're non-interchangeable. So we can't then substitute another form to take that place. And, you know, this is a wonderful statement. Our assumption is that it will be there just as we assume when we turn on the tap, water will be there. So there's one of our assumptions. It's not working too well anymore. And just to give you an idea, I want to invite you all to look around this room, look at your clothing, look at everything in the room, and find something that doesn't either use oil as one of its major natural resources that it's in the production, or using it to run the machinery that produces it, or uses it to transport it. Can you find anything here? It is a bit scary. And my prime motivation is to take us out of the fear and into the opportunity. So I know we have to just sort of all be on the same plate, and that's why I'm showing this. I love this quote because it's so true. Know your municipality's vulnerabilities because there isn't necessarily anyone else thinking about them. This is our job. And we've already seen the impact in our lives. The price of transportation is going up, therefore the price of food is going up. Now this was written, this is from the Oregonian on the 25th of January. And every one but one of these, one of the major reasons for the price escalation is transportation. So the long-term challenge then is, how will the global economy adjust when we are shipping everything across all over the globe, and how will that affect us regionally? And just from a basic strategy standpoint for the city, how do we make meaningful budgets? How do we make long-term, long-range land use and transportation plans? And how does this city serve the needs of our community? So that's what they call energy uncertainty. Now, there's a couple other things we're going to look at. One is climate change. And that could affect us on multiple levels. And we actually don't know a lot about how that's going to affect us. So we are dependent, obviously, on our environment. There are short-term challenges, and there are long-term challenges. And there are a lot of question marks. So that's climate uncertainty. Hi. So the two issues that we're looking at first are peak oil and global warming. And I won't go into the details here, but you can see there are a lot of reasons why it's a problem. I know you guys know a lot about this, so that's why I'm trying to hurry up and get to the part on transition towns. Two other issues. One is population. And the people who did transition towns didn't include this, but I think it's absolutely vital. Because we've had exponential growth, as you can see. And you know, it's hard to understand unless you're a statistician what that means. But every time that it doubles, it takes all of the previous growth and doubles it. So like from 1750 to 1950, all of that, then you double it, and so forth. So we're looking at huge growth on the planet. The other one is peak credit. And you know, people have actually combined all this and call it peak everything now. So again, what are the issues? And what's the issue with credit? And it's not just credit, it's our whole economy and how the mindset with which we create it. That's another talk. But those all weave together to create the challenges we're looking at. So peak everything, climate, population, uncertainty. Okay, so when we look at that and we go, oh, gee, what are we going to do? Well, what do you do when you're looking at a problem? The first thing you do is you survey what you have. This is a permaculture term, netting what is. So what do we have here already that we can rely on? And there's actually quite a bit. Ashland is one of, let's see, what is it, 600 cities in the United States that signed this agreement in 2005. It's the Climate Protection Agreement signed by all the U.S. mayors. I won't go into the details of this, but you can go online and get all the details of what it means and the agreements that Ashland has agreed to. We also have a Solar Pioneer 2 program. Does anybody know about that here?
I do.
Great, okay. So, you know, being aware of our geography, a lot of us don't get enough solar access to really benefit, because we're basically facing north, to really benefit from solar panels. But there are places in town where you can, and the government has those buildings and has that land. And so the idea is that if you don't have enough access, you can actually purchase power from the city and use their photovoltaic cells and then sell it back to the city when there's a lot generated. We also have a emergency program called CERT. In May, we just had April, I think the end of April, we just had a training. This is important because remember, as that pebble drops in the pond and we have those wakes, we need to make sure that all these structures are in place. Oh, so that's when it was. And they do those fairly often. Now, what else is happening? Well, a couple years ago, actually, I think it was in 2003, a group of citizens got together on some parkland and said, we want to grow food. And it prompted the City Parks Commission to actually look at that whole concept of who are the parks for, how do we use them, how do we acknowledge what our citizens want with our parks. And they came up with the decision, and this is unusual, for most of the cities in the US don't have this, that they will support citizen gardens in our parks. Now, a lot of people don't know that, so that's why I'm putting this here, because if you don't have room to grow food, this is one place you can go. So each municipality has its own unique quirks and needs, and so each one has to come up with its own unique solutions to being resilient. And we are blessed to have Portland as one of the trailblazers, and actually they're one of the trailblazers in the whole country. If you go to relocalize.net, you can find out all that they're doing. They are really looking at how to create resilience in Portland. And what's wonderful about this is they've already done a briefing book, they've looked at a lot of their systems, and as they've had task force meetings, they've looked at the facts. Well, a lot of their facts are our facts. So they've really done us a favor. For example, these are notes from the Peak Oil Task Force on Transportation and Land Use. And what they're looking at is, where's our fuel coming from? And as you can see, 100% of our fuel in this state is imported. And we're at the end of the pipeline. So we're not in a very good position. This is information we need to know. And they're doing that work for us, so I'm really grateful. They also came up with a program. They're starting to look at a descent oil plan, and it's a beautiful plan. I encourage you to go onto the web and look this over. They've looked at several points that they feel are really important, and they're addressing them right now.
Whose website is that?
Let me give that to you at the end. Remind me, okay?
Is it the state?
Yeah, no, it's Portland Peak Oil. And if you go to relocalize.org, that's where you'll find it. And I can go back to any of this at the break if you'd like. The other thing I started asking myself is, well, okay, this is what citizens can do, and this is what citizens are doing, but what are the people who have all the money doing? What are corporations doing? I mean, they have to deal with this too. And they have the ability to hire the brightest minds and to create think tanks and really look at this issue for themselves. And what I found is a lot of them are creating future scenarios. And there's no real reason why we can't do that too. So these are the steps they go through. They actually get a group of people together and create possible future scenarios. And they look at them, but they don't just say, well, what could happen? They look at how those scenarios affect any of the assumptions, underlying assumptions that, or what they call groupthink, that they have been using as they develop their strategies. And that's a really great point, because we all have that. Every community has it, every person has it. We all have our perceptual filter of what's really happening. And if our assumptions are changing, then we need to look at that and see if that's really serving us. So they come up with possible options in response to those scenarios. The trouble was, when they got into these board meetings and brought all this think tank work to the CEOs and had management sessions, everybody was on a different level of perceiving the situation. So they were left with, what do we do to bring that together? Some people were in total denial. Other people were, we're going to die. I mean, it ran the gamut. So how do we bridge that? And one author came up with a wonderful strategy. Now, mind you, the wording here is for corporations, but we can use it ourselves too. So they asked several questions. What are our assumptions? How do our current strategies serve us if the assumptions change? What options can we create? And now here's the business language, to invest in over time that would improve the robustness of our overall portfolio of strategies. Now, our strategies are not only survival, but thriving. We want to thrive. We want life to be fun, too. So if those assumptions change, what are our options? And what could we be doing right now so that we are more prepared? And the source of this is an article called Engaging the Future by Brian Smith. Post-carbon cities came up with a strategy for different, and again, they're looking at sort of a meta focus, so they're saying, okay, what are some really basic things that all cities need to address? So they're not looking at the uniqueness of each city, okay? But these are strategies for us to look at. Deal with transportation and land use, number one. So, commit the resources and look at serious change. Now, what are our cities designed around right now? Yeah, cars, right? Not people. And so that's one of the issues here, is that there's so many underlying assumptions that we have just grown used to. So rethink our land use and our transportation practices. Also, look at our time frames. 100-year time frames are not too short. I spoke with some of the people who are city employees, head of departments in the city, and they told me that sometimes they have 1 year time frames. 1 year. I don't know how they do anything with 1 year. Even 5 is short. So start to expand those so we can start looking at from a broader standpoint. And then organize our neighborhoods so that the people can come together much easier. Tackle our energy consumption. So go to the businesses and maybe engage in a conversation with those 5 questions. The resilience in our businesses who serve our needs needs to be part of the whole strategy. And so we can start that conversation right now. And then look at it, and we have a tendency to look for big fixes. And a lot of them said, no, you know what? We need to look at it from so many angles because it's such a complex issue. What if we looked at it from all different angles and made little incremental changes every step around the way? And that way, and this is an example from Princeton University. And can you see the wedges? Yeah, you can. That way, if any one of the assumptions that's supporting any of those wedges collapses, the whole thing doesn't collapse. We already have other strategies in place. And then plan for change. Don't just wait for it to happen, actually plan for it. We can educate ourselves, we can educate the city officials, anybody who's involved. And when I was reading this, it said stakeholders, and I thought, well, who isn't a stakeholder? Even non-humans are stakeholders. And start integrating this in our lives, in our everyday lives. And the primary one above all was to build a sense of community, to really get beyond knowing everybody and saying hi in the store to actually caring for each other and being concerned if everybody has food or they're making their mortgage payments or they're getting their needs met. And so that brought up a whole other issue of what is community and how do we actually engage in that? Albert Bates has 2 great quotes. Whenever people develop an attitude of caring for the well-being of the whole, community is present. And I really love that one. But then he also made a wonderful point, and it's not just in the second quote what gets us together, it's what keeps us together that matters. Resilient connections create viable and sustainable communities. There's a 3rd book back there that I invite you to look at during the break, and it's this book right here. And I can't say this strong enough. It was just published last week. I'm devouring it, and you can see where I've written all over it and where I haven't. Peter Block is one of the experts who's worked with communities for a long time in many different settings. He's written, I think, 8 books, but this one is by far the culmination. And he really looks at, I love even the title says it all, community, the structure of belonging. And what he says is the sense of belonging is what's usually missing in a community. And just briefly, I want to tell you, one of the things, they did studies to see what makes resilient communities, what makes them thrive. When you ask people, what communities really work and don't seem dysfunctional, it wasn't the amount of money, It wasn't any of the common factors that people normally think. It was a sense of belonging. It was knowing each other and caring. That is the criteria that makes or breaks a community. So he came up with these wonderful descriptions of what a citizen is and how he defines them. And I just want to share this with you because this is the nitty-gritty of when we go to do the transition suggestions that they have gone through in the UK and all the experiments they've done in transitioning. What they're finding is the basis of everything is how we own what a citizen is and how we own the sense of community. So quite quickly, a citizen is one who is willing to be accountable and committed to the well-being of the whole. The whole can be a city block, a community, a nation, or just the whole planet. A citizen is one who produces the future. Doesn't just think about it, doesn't wait for it to happen, or beg for it. And then this one I love. The antithesis of being a citizen is the choice to be a consumer or a client. Consumers give away power. And I had to think about that for a few minutes, but then I realized if I'm a consumer, what I'm doing is I'm saying, you over there, you go get your think tank together, you figure it out, and then I'll just buy it. And what that does is it takes away my creative power. But on top of that, the people over there, those others, they actually define what my needs are instead of me. So this is strong stuff. He says citizenship is a state of being. It's a place you come from. And then he goes through actually points of how you would become a strong citizen. Hold oneself accountable for the well-being of the collective. Choose to own and exercise your power rather than defer or delegate it to others. Enter into collective possibility. That doesn't mean you know the answers, it's just a possibility that gives hospitable and restorative community its own sense of being. Hospitable means we actually feed each other and take care of each other and welcome each other, like in the old stories when a stranger showed up, you took care of them. Acknowledge the community grows out of the possibility of the citizens. It's not built by specialized experts or leadership, the myth of leadership, or improved services. It's built by great citizens. And attend to the gifts and capacities of all. Act to bring those gifts from the margin to the center. And finally, he talks about how community shifts our whole context, our whole way of looking at who we are and what we're about and why we're here. So it shifts from the concepts of fear and fault to gifts, generosity, and abundance. From belief in more laws and more oversight to belief in our own social fabric, our creative genius that's present right in this room, and our chosen accountability. To belief in the corporate structure, the idea that the other experts will handle everything, to our associations with each other, who we know, who we meet in the store, at school, wherever. That's where our community is. To shift from the focus of leaders, someone who's going to lead us into the right path, to realizing that we are the leaders. From problems to possibilities. And to shift away from the whole glamorization of leadership. To realizing that there's an inner leader in every single person. And in the right situation, that is their moment to be the leader. And they shine. Okay, so back to some of the work that's been happening locally. Some of the Post-Hoc Carbon Institute has come up with a map for what this could look like. Now, it's a generalized map, but I'm just going to run it through really quickly so you can get an idea of how fresh and alive this is as we reinvent ourselves. Basically, they're looking at how do we provide basic goods, food, fuel, electricity, our material goods that we need, and how can we source them locally and dependably. So there's the map. We're going to look at it up close real quick. But notice that it's all closed loops. Everything feeds back into each other. So the first thing is the energy. So on the left here, they have the reliable sources of energy that we know of: sun, tides, wind, rain, and the temperature of the earth. That's a constant. And so those are the energy fuels that we can rely on. And then we create loops so that any way that we're producing energy, it comes back into the system. They look at local manufacturing. Now, when I was researching this, I was looking for how much manufacturing do we actually have in this area. There's not a lot. And we have some really key companies, and they're wonderful. But I don't even know what the percentage is, but a huge number of our goods come from outside, and not even close outside, pretty far outside the community. And finally, currency. Right now we have one currency, the dollar, US dollar, which is on pretty shaky ground right now. So how do we think of taking care of our needs, of trading, of reciprocating between each other in a way that is not reliant? And there are many, many ways of doing that. And there's a lot of action happening right locally in that right now, in fact. Okay, so there's the map again. And then I just want to briefly show you some of the models that are already out there before we look at transition towns much closer. There's Eco City Movement from Richard Register. I'm not going to go in. There's actually a little YouTube thing with him talking, but I want to skip that right now. If you want later on in the question and answer, I'll be glad to show that to you. And then how many here are familiar with Cradle to Cradle, the book? William McDonough and I can't think of the other guy's name, Braungart, wrote this brilliant book about creating systems with closed loops so that there is no sense of waste in any way. Everything becomes food for something else. And they have been hired now, their firm has been hired to actually develop 12 cities in China, because as we looked at the escalation in population, China is looking at, in the next few years, having millions more people to feed and house. And so proactively, they already have people coming in, they've hired to design towns that are more resilient. How are we doing time-wise? Because I want to see if this is inappropriate. If we have 7:45.
15 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to skip this, but if you guys, after the break, if you want to come back and watch this, it's really powerful. He talks about all the creative ideas, many of which we could incorporate here. We also have something called Peak Moment TV. Has anybody seen this? These are two women who decided, they wanted to see who's doing something out there. And they live in Northern California, and they've actually been to Ashland quite recently. They were here April 19th filming at the community garden. But they decided, I want to find out who's out there and what they're doing. And if you go to their website, which is right there, you can watch all these brilliant people who are coming up with great ideas to deal with a lot of these issues. And if you ever feel depressed, this is one of the best ways to feel good about humanity again. I swear, when I'm depressed, I go here and I just listen to these people. They're brilliant. There's some other, I won't go into the details, but one I want to just briefly tell you is the biggest NGO in Sri Lanka was started by one person who said, what are our basic human needs and how can we meet them? And I don't know how much you know about Sri Lanka, but they have had a civil war for decades. And so there's a lot of poverty as a result of the civil war. And he said, okay, well, what if we just went into each village and we looked at these 10 needs and then we addressed the basic needs, the core needs, and we'll look at the one that needs to be addressed first, and we'll address that, and then we'll go up the line, and then the next one and the next one. What he came up with was a design that was brilliant. He now has transformed 15,000 villages into eco-villages. They are highly resilient. He's affected the lives of over 1 million people. And basically what he says is after they go in and teach people how to be self-reliant in the community, then he says, go find another village. Now it's your job to teach them. We can adopt this here. And there's many ways we can. So I just wanted to show you that. I invite you to go to www.gaia.org and see some of the wonderful work they're doing. Again, I'll go buy this right now.
What was that again?
Gaia.org. Kinsale, I just want to say a word about Kinsale. Rob Hopkins, who started the Transition Towns movement, originally lived in Kinsale and was a permaculture teacher at the local community college. And he got his students, his advanced students, together in 2005, and he said, you know, if we were going to create an energy descent plan, what would that look like? And they realized very quickly that if you write it like most, what would you call it, city planning documents, that no one would ever read it because it would be so boring. So they tried to come up with a way that they could present something that was so compelling, everybody was reading it in the whole town, and it was exciting, and they were laughing and just joyful about it. And so they came up with some brilliant ideas, and you can go online and find this. There's the website. But they came up with, I'll just briefly say, some of the things they did is they projected a timeline into the future. And they said, well, 5 years from now, what have we already done? And they happen to be very similar to Ashland. Kinsale is a small town, but it's known for its restaurants. So they said, oh, why don't we become recognized as a slow food town? Right? And does everybody know what slow food is? Slow food is a concept that came out of Rome, and the idea is that we've rushed our experience of food so much so that we no longer can truly enjoy it. Slow down, cook and prepare it mindfully and slowly, and then savor every single bite. And there's this whole movement now that took off around the world called slow food. And if you're a slow food restaurant or you're a slow food town, people go there in droves because they know that everything is done in the most mindful way. So we happen to have a tourist industry. We're a prime candidate for a slow food town. So that was one of the things they did. And they realized that if they went ahead and did that, they could also get a lot of publicity for their town through that. And again, support the local community economy. They went into all aspects, and I won't go any further, but I encourage you to go read this. They were very, very clever about the things they did. And the stories they wrote about themselves were all as though they already happened in the future. And then this is just the way life is. And so it's delightful. Everybody wanted to just read, oh, what are we doing there? What are we doing in education? And it was wonderful. So Rob then went to get his PhD in the UK, and he moved to a town called Totnes in England. It's the home of Schumacher College, and started the idea of transition towns off of the work that he did in Kinsale, and produced this book that just came out at the beginning of this year, and the copy is up there. I can't say enough good about this book. It's tremendous. And we're going to hear Rob talk about it himself. So basically, what is a transition town initiative? It looks at these 4 assumptions. That life will probably dramatically change for us regarding energy consumption and all the other challenges we were looking at. That what we lack is resilience more than anything. And that we have to act collectively. We can no longer operate from the idea of the individual, that we actually will pull through this together. And that we have the collective genius right here to do it ourselves right now. We don't need to go get experts. We can do it. So, took off, started in Totnes. As of January 2008, all of these towns, these are in Scotland, England, Australia, and New Zealand, have some form of a transition initiative going in them. And then, just to give you an idea of the difference between the transition approach and conventional environmentalism, we have a comparison here, and there's a few I just want to highlight. Whoops, that didn't work. Now we'll get to see, oh, this time it worked beautifully. Okay, so it's a switch from individual behavior to group behavior. It's a switch from a single issue, that clear cutting that's happening over there that we need to go stop, to a holistic. It's an entire systems approach in every aspect of what makes a community. The tools change. Our aim is resilience and relocalization, so that changes. Some of my favorites are we switch from fear, guilt, shock as the drivers of action to hope, optimism, and proactivity. We change from pointing to the man or the woman in the street and saying they're the problem to saying, no, they're the solution. We go from an engagement on a single level to engagement on a variety of levels. And this is my favorite. We go from prescriptive, from advocating certain answers and responses. I know the answer, follow me, to we don't know the answer. This is new territory for all of us. But we can be catalysts. We can actually start experimenting and exploring together and have fun in doing it. So what does resilience mean? And these are just a way of helping you understand what they mean by those terms. So if you're doing centralized recycling here in this town, which we have a great program doing that, but the things we recycle come from outside the area, they go into the recycling center, and then they're shipped out again. That's not a closed loop. So that's not local resilience. Resilience is you handle the composting of whatever it is right here, and you close that loop. City trees that are ornamental instead of producing food. You know, they're just as pretty, but they actually produce free food. This is a good thing. Organic food is wonderful, but a lot of it is shipped. Why not just get it locally? And I love this one, low energy buildings. There's a whole green building movement, which is fabulous. But they're actually coming up with buildings that are so tight and well designed that your own body heat heats it. That's pretty cool. And then there's some more carbon offsetting, local community investment mechanisms for the energy itself. This bottom one I think is really important. We have a blue sky program here that's really wonderful, but it's with Bonneville. It's with a big corporation. Why not just have our energy supplied right here locally, where we are in control of it? Okay, so I know we're getting short on time. I'm going to show you two very short videos. This is Rob Hopkins explaining the 12 steps. And I want him to do it in his own words because he's a funny guy. I think it's funny he came up with the 12-step program too. I don't think he's been to the U.S. that much.
He's what, Irish or what?
You know, I don't know what his nationality. He was living in Ireland and then he moved to the UK. So I'm to England. So here we go. There's a lot of these on YouTube, by the way.
So the 12 stages that we've been developing are really based on sort of observing what has worked in Totnes, and each town is taking them and doing them in different ways, is assembling them in different orders, is prioritizing some, forgetting about others, and it's very interesting to look at the different towns and how that's been working. The first one we call Designers, former steering group and Designers Demise from the outset, and that kind of feels really important to us at this stage. I mean, I know for some groups it raises a lot of questions, but the experience in Totnes was that when we started, we formed a steering group who we thought were the great and the good, and the kind of great, good and the green of Totnes, and we assembled these people together. But the problem with assembling those people together as your steering group is that they're very, very busy. And they tend to be the people who are on about 40 different committees. And you end up having meetings where you say, what should happen next is, but nobody will actually do it because they're all too busy. But actually those people are very, very useful at the beginning for pushing the first stage forward. But when you get later in the process, that needs to change around. The next is the awareness raising stage, which is really getting people educated about peak oil. But it's very important that we don't do what is often termed information dumping. In the addictions field, it's called information dumping, where you present people with the end of suburbia to take home and watch on their own in their house, with no one else there, with no shoulders to weep on. And we somehow expect that they're going to watch the film and then and then start mulching the next day. and I think that's actually really, really irresponsible. And I think if we're going to introduce this information to individuals and to communities, that we have a responsibility into how that information is communicated. So we really try to make all the film screenings that we do, as well as being a film screening, it's a networking opportunity to meet all the other people there. It's also an opportunity for people to digest that information in the company of other people, to talk about it, to talk through its implications, and that strikes me as much more responsible. And we do that same thing with talks as well. The next one is to lay the foundations, as in really kind of getting to know who all the different groups are in the town, who are already doing things, who they are, what they're up to, and to value what's already there. And often we try and organise where we can events with other organisations. So we've run climate change events with local Friends of the Earth. We work with Schumacher College. We've got this conference about estates coming up at the Dartington Hall with the Dartington Hall Trust in a week or so. And that's really, really useful for kind of building that network of alliances. The official unleashing. And I love the term unleashing, and it really does seem to be what happens at it. And I think that awareness raising stage is like those children's volcanoes that you put bicarbonate of soda and vinegar in, and they start to froth, and you have your hand over the top, and that point where it feels like it's all about to disgorge its contents all over your living room floor is the point where you have your unleashing. It's where, and the way we kind of gauged when to do our unleashing was when the number of people stopping us in the street and saying, what's happening? What's going to happen now? What's next? Was one of the ways that we gauged it. The thing with doing it too early is that you really miss the opportunity for that to be a really spectacular event. The danger of leaving it too late is that it becomes kind of irrelevant, really, and the whole thing is already unleashed. And you hold an unleashing event when it's already unleashed. So the timing of it isn't something that there's kind of rules of thumb about. It's really something that you have to kind of get a feel for. But it should be designed as an evening which is what people will look back to historically as the evening when it all started. And the unleashing in Lewis was lovely because it was in a big hall and there was another big hall next to it. And lots of the different local environmental groups were invited and they all had stalls within that area too. So they all felt really included and part of it too. And each town can interpret that in their own.
Uh-oh. Is that what it was?
Own way with music and food and whatever.
See the red line at the bottom?
Yeah.
It should be a really fantastic celebration of this journey that collectively the place is about to embark on. The next thing is to form groups, the working groups. I don't know, we have 9 or 10 I think in Totnes now, and Stroud I think there's a few more than that. Sometimes you can engineer those. Some of the groups we really engineered. We designed whole events that would draw those groups together. So for the food group we ran an evening called Feeding Totnes Past, Present and Future, with a speaker for each of those 3 things. Some of the groups just arose spontaneously, like our local government group. A number of people involved in local government said, we'd love to set up a group which networks the 2 things together. And then some of the other groups, we actually sort of, sort of co-opted groups that were already functioning in the town. So there was a very strong transport group in the town. So rather than setting up another transport group in opposition, we kind of brought them in, and they're now the TTT transport group. There's now an oral histories reminiscences project who came to us and said, well, we were going to start an oral history reminiscence project, but we'd love to do it within the context of TTT and making that connection with what's happening, people's memories of before TTT.
Did you all hear what he just said? Are you having a hard time hearing this? Okay, let's not do this then. I'm going to just go through them myself. Absolutely, absolutely. What he was talking about is they were having an oral history program. And what they realized is that a lot of the data that they need in order to be resilient is residing in the brains of the elderly in their community, who, lived before oil was the major influence in their lives. And that they needed to start taping their stories and listening to them and re-skilling themselves. And so they had this whole program they developed. And so I'm going to skip past all of this, but one of their major points is to honor the elders and the knowledge that they hold. And I just love that. So just a sec. We'll skip all of this. And
in the 60s, they did that in a program in Kentucky and West Virginia and Virginia, and it came out in the group of books called Foxfire.
Yes, I do remember those. So here's the 12 steps very briefly. Set up the steering group and then design its demise. Raise awareness. And again, do it in a way that doesn't scare people but engages them. And then lay the foundations. Find the people who are already doing this in your community and connect with them so we don't reinvent the wheel. Organize the great unleashing. That's that volcanic unleashing. And what I love is that they think about it as 20 years in the future, we will look back on that day as the moment that we started this process. So it has to be big. You bring in speakers from outside, you have fun. It's a big unleashing. And then you form your groups. Where's your passion? Is it food? Is it transportation? Is it growing food or other aspects of the food industry? Whatever. Energy, alternative energy. Use open space. Now I invite you to go watch the open space on YouTube also, the little videos that describe it. Open space is a very powerful tool for large groups. That and World Cafe. Has anybody ever done World Cafe here? Great. And we actually did one Sunday night for the group that's looking at our food future. And it was wonderfully successful. It was 100 people that met at the middle school Sunday and had a World Cafe. So check these out. These are great tools, and they really are powerful. Then develop visible, practical manifestations. So it's important when people are working in their passion and putting a lot of time and energy into things to actually see something happening. So create ways that they can see it. So they had things, and they had fun things like Seedy Sunday is actually a seed exchange extravagant. It's like a big fair, and everybody has all their seeds, and then they have music, and they have poetry, and again, they make it fun. Facilitate the great reskilling. This is what I was just talking about. He makes this comment, he says, we are probably hands down the least skilled generation ever on the planet. We're great when it comes to the digital world, but when it comes to feeding ourselves and housing ourselves, all of that, forget it. We just, we've lost those. So it's time to reskill.
This is where your older generation comes in.
That's right. Build a bridge to local government, but you don't go to them first. You don't go looking for the leaders to lead you. You become the leaders. And when there's that, that large mass of grassroots effort, the government can't help but say, yeah, we want to work with you. That looks good. And I tell you, I showed this to the head of the electricity department here because I wanted to make sure that the information I gave was accurate. And he said, I've been trying to do this for years here. And no one would listen to me. And I said, okay, because he said there's political reasons. And I said, okay, what can we do? And he said, do a grassroots movement. I said, okay, so here we are. But there's a lot of friends in government here. Honor the elders. This is the big one. Let it go where it wants to go. So this is not about controlling anything or having the answer, because we really, in all humility, do not have a clue what we're doing. We haven't ever done this before. Even when we were pioneers in the wilds, the world was different. It was nowhere near as complex as it is today. So we are pioneers here. And just allowing it to go and allowing that genius of our community to bubble up and honor it and play with it is so important. And then you create an energy descent plan. And that's what we described earlier that the city Kinsale did in Ireland. That's the beginning. Because then you have to implement all of that. But this is the fun part, and this is the state we're in right now. Can you feel how exciting that could be? Instead of being like, it's like, oh, we actually get to reinvent ourselves. Okay, so if you're ready, if you could find a partner. I'm going to put all 3 questions up and just take, 2 minutes each to answer these questions and just go with them. So the first one is, when I hear about climate change and peak oil, the concerns I have include. Okay, so go ahead and just take a minute each. Find a partner. If we're an odd number, someone can do it with me. So do we have enough people? 1, 2, 3. We are an odd number.
How are we moving on existing as we have? We're going to have to change their lifestyle. Change my lifestyle. I've already entered the post-fossil fuel era. Whether I liked it or not.
My number one concern is the first word that comes up for me is fear. And then the second one I ask myself, fear of what? And the first fear I have is fear of starvation. Because if we can't turn the food into other places because there's no oil, or there isn't any food because the climate is not allowing
I don't trust them.
Well, I starve to for everyone I know starved to death on the
My guess would be there's would be a lot of
Most of us are pretty privileged. Locally self-sufficient.
It's one nice thing about this area, is that all the fruits growing out in the apple yeah, if they had to bring it to market with a horse and wagon, they probably my garden is going gangbusters. If we had to, I could plow up every square inch of ground in my backyard.
That's how I feel. My city.
Not all of them, but
30 seconds.
little skinny, pointy things.
Have you ever
I'm very concerned about future generations.
No, there's some kind of cedar, some kind of There's one more, but it's too big to move in there to incorporate.
I knew about global warming 25 years ago.
What was that lady's name?
Started in California. It's been speaking all over the world. And about it. I knew about it a long time ago.
Tell me about that.
But I feel very helpless because people don't understand. People don't care.
The problem is, if there isn't, you'll find
My
some.
backyard's kind of small. It's sort of conifers.
There's conifers.
Okay, try to.
If you throw up any kind of.
Do you need some more time? You need more time?
Electric cars.
She's ready to start again? She's ready to start again.
Does everybody feel complete there? Okay, what I'm going to suggest is if you have something you want to throw out that's really hot that came up for you, I will keep track of it for you. Just throw some ideas out and I'll document them for us.
She doesn't have any money, so she doesn't.
Anybody have anything that came up?
Trailer for $250. Is it great?
Local alternative energy supply.
She would rather
Okay.
probably go live with Marvin and get into the big interpersonal hassle so she can.
And what's the question? How are we going to do it?
Well, I received
Richard told me
the
about
information of
trailer.
Ashland, the city of Ashland, and I thought,
What trailer?
at first glance, it sounds great,
Oh,
but
yeah, 16.
it's not well thought out. I can't subscribe to that. It's
Oh,
not,
yeah, I
it's
thought
not a
about
good
that,
program.
you know,
Okay.
buying
It's
it
a lease
myself
program, it's
for
not an
something.
ownership of it.
Yeah.
But the thing
Yeah,
is,
okay,
you don't
so-
know that you would always be able to leave it there. What if in a year they said, oh, we're selling this property and we're trading that one?
Anything else? Anybody want?
The culture is a slow motion train.
Is it what?
The
Our
culture.
culture is a slow motion train
Right.
wreck with
Is it gonna
regard
stay
to
at
these
295 or go to 1,000 at 295?
Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
The first thing that came up for me is fear. So I asked myself, fear of what? Fear of starving to death, because if they can't truck the food in from everywhere else. But then I remembered that in the valley here, there's all those wonderful organic farms out in the Applegate, and I thought, well, this would be a good place to wait out the whatever. I mean, assuming it rains or whatever, if they had to bring the food from the Applegate in a horse and buggy, which you probably did 100 years ago, you know.
Population
Then
was a
the
lot
next
smaller
thought
than
was, well, I'll just get my husband to dig up the whole damn backyard and plant more stuff.
There you go.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah.
I like that.
We all have to start promoting more trains.
Yes. More public transportation.
No, I mean transportation of everything. By train and not those terrible big trucks.
I have some gorgeous potato plants.
Yeah, we've got a train right in our backyard.
Yeah.
It's not being used for something other than shipping wood north and south.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a great option. You ready to go to the next question?
No.
No? Got more?
The end of central heating. Houses are, built underground or half underground, and a small wood stove. You don't need to be having heating running all the time, and you
Yeah.
learn how to dress for the, the season, as well as have a diet that fits the season.
Okay, that's great. So, I'm gonna do everything seasonally. And design for the season, too. Anything else? Want to go to the next question? Okay. So, next question. My vision for Ashland after peak oil is ...
Because what?
Okay, so 2 minutes each.
Oh, because there's so much sun here.
I know it's short, but it's just to get this flowing. Go ahead.
Oh, wow. That's really new and clear,
So contrary to most places, they say,
Virginia, with the climate change, you know, the climate's been here, and the breeze for 10 months, I can afford no sun. You see what I mean? Okay, your vision for Ashland.
Here, you raised it, you said it was been a year and a half.
Yeah, and I worked at a community garden, I was doing that.
That's right, because you've got all these well springs there.
Oh, I don't want I don't want to pay for it.
That's what that's about
I had to pay for it. I had to pay $1,300 for a total creek, and nobody uses it. They don't.
It's a third.
No, they don't.
About the same as it is now.
So it's all happening.
Walk
Like
right
right now,
away,
bike,
there's public transportation.
Anyhow.
I have two very pointed questions to ask you.
Okay. We'll do this, we only have one more question.
Yeah, later on.
I'm really concerned about.
In America, they didn't, I know Europe is different.
Have friends.
They didn't think about that here.
Tell them it's not here yet.
Well, I'm from Berkeley,
Getting
where
here
people
and
walk.
installing it.
People walk everywhere. People are walking.
Okay,
Go to another
whoever's speaking, finish up and switch to the other person.
Oh, no, you can do it that way here. Where I came from was different here.
Well, it doesn't have to have a sewer connection, the person can use the kitchen in the house and the bathroom.
I think it's very dangerous. So many teenagers getting killed.
I have a question for you.
Hit by
Have
cars.
people look, I'm sure they have, the future
So
of
your
cell
plan with him
phones
is to
and
fill everything
computers, I would really
When
like
did
to
you
know.
first tell me?
And the energy that it takes to run those, yes.
Well, I mean, you can be off the grid and run that stuff. They don't draw a lot of energy, but I just want to know if we're going to still have that resource.
Public transportation.
There is a
Find a
whole
place.
portion of our culture working on that, like all the guys at Google.
Yeah.
I mean, they know what they're up against, and they're working on it. What that looks like, I don't know.
What about
I
vans?
recently read something about having the whole United States, having it available, like, besides the United States, one flat fee, you can have a cell phone and a laptop, so they can use Wi-Fi.
You know, all that we have to do is get out of the mindset that that kind of thing is profit, and get into the mindset that it's a service that we want to offer each other because we care about each other.
I mean, it would be so nice, I mean, like, I do like Skype with my sister, and she's,
That was right.
you know, she's on her sailboat in the Caribbean, and we're looking at each other, talking to each other, she's on her laptop. And it's free.
Yes, I do. I have students that I coach all over the world for Gaia University. I mean, you know, I'm dealing with time zones all the time,
Against a better
but
judgment.
we couldn't even do this university without that.
Right, and so you don't have to fly places anymore, because I don't think that's gonna, you know, be an option for many.
Same, by the same
So
attitude
to
that
be
they
able
made
to
a
have that
homeless.
connection, I think world connection is, you know, really essential.
It is.
Compared to like trains and planes,
30 seconds.
characters are the same.
Like Carol. All that trouble we went to go from free healing work loading her things to help her lift her.
Okay. Anybody want to share? You have a hot share?
Less tourists.
Oh,
They're one of our major sources of income.
I know, how are they gonna get here?
That's something we deal with. Actually, I looked into that. A large number of our tourists are fairly local. They're not that far away.
She'll probably end up.
They're either Northern California or, you know, Portland.
Bay Area, a lot of Bay Area people up
So
here.
fucking so.
Yeah, actually, we need to support them in getting here. That's one of our major sources that.
They can hop on the train.
We need Amtrak to
Okay.
come through.
So is that your vision?
It goes to Brookings now, I
Yeah,
can make them.
Okay.
the vision is Amtrak comes through Ashland,
Yeah, that would be really nice.
rather than
When he
Clamathal.
called to find
Well,
out
he's
about
not there for
Yeah,
I
do
know.
every other day, something like that.
Why did I come to California?
Well, they did it because of the Siskiyou Pass. And the tunnel there fell apart. And it took many years to get the tunnel. Of course, the pass
Oh, I see.
speed for the trains. That's why
Yeah.
they routed to Klamath Falls.
Oh, that makes sense, yeah. But from Klamath Falls, you don't have to go over, yeah, you do have to go over mountains.
Anything else?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, wait a second, guys. I can't hear.
I want them to change the permit system because the way they have the permit system set up now is it's insupportable of anything but stick frame housing. And there's so many cool alternatives out there. Like I've tried to get gray water permits and all
Yes,
that
me too.
stuff. And the thing is, it's impossible. So when I bought land, I bought it outside of any city because I couldn't build or have what I wanted to have.
Yes.
And I think it's like insane that they don't support that reality where you can build your own completely sustainable house in the city limits.
Yeah.
I think that has to change.
Yeah.
Well, you would do it on July.
Change permit systems.
You would do it on July.
Federal housing.
Theoretically, he paid you.
those laws were only recently put into place. Oregon didn't really have.
Transportation. Here's a nice one. I have a classroom in my house. Technically, I'm not zoned for a classroom in my house. But why would I go rent a space halfway across town and have people get in cars
Drinking water.
come to my place when a lot of the people want to take my classes are right by my door?
Yeah, but
Well, you just don't call it a classroom, you call it your living room.
Yeah, I call it the family.
Imagine
Right.
14.
I know, but yeah.
But I mean, that's how you get around it, right? But
Why do you have to get around it?
why do we have to get around it? And that's one of the solutions that the Postcard Institute came up with, is to rezone things to allow for multiple uses within your neighborhoods. So for example, instead of hopping in the car and going to the farmer's market, if your whole community, your neighborhood is growing a lot of vegetables,
System
have your own farmer's market right there, you know? It's trade,
controls
you know?
it.
But you may have to have a stall or someplace where that happens. So that needs to be an allowable use.
A vision
Well,
would
maybe,
be
I don't know.
to have more classes like this available to more people. Just, you know, how do we do it? Like, for example, for Thanksgiving,
One of the other things.
where do I buy local foods? How
Messing up the
how do I have a Thanksgiving that's just
I
locally
can tell you
grown?
that.
Okay,
Yeah.
but you can tell me, but I look for it as public information. I
Yes,
can't
it
find
should be.
9
Yes.
AM and 9 PM.
The growers market goes through the.
Don't want him on premises.
I didn't know it was
Doing that.
You just have to ask. You'll find out.
Okay, anything else?
Foundations.
Woman who came down here from.
Yeah.
Good
I'm so
ideas.
tired and
Okay, ready
don't
for the
wanna
last
stay
one?
night.
Okay, question number 3.
Move.
Yeah, did you apologize?
The steps I can take toward this vision are,
That's where the lost came.
and they can be really small, it doesn't matter. Remember, the small incremental steps is what we're looking for.
Sorry,
Okay, 2 minutes.
What are we working on?
Steps I
The
can
steps I can take toward this vision are,
ride my bike.
You have a bicycle?
Yeah, I rode it to the PO this morning instead of taking my car.
Personal
Tom walks to the office.
the line on the carpet.
Walk to work.
My commute to go to work is rolling out of bed.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I believe
My husband calls it my 20-second commute.
20-second.
In the back of the computer with a couple of balconies.
It's not just weather and economic.
That's extremely ecological.
And he was paying half the rent. He was there the year and a half I was on the street. So we used to pay the rent with 2 checks. Instead of running it from my bank account, because I was broke and I never had enough money.
Not just as a
But
transport.
it was once a year. It was already working on that balance. I could get up at 4 and drive down. That's another old story. And sit back and I used to fall asleep to read. I mean, I could talk for hours.
Sounds like Dr. Marvin.
Kind of, yeah, that is and but every time he would get fired, it was always the boss. And the 4th time it happened, I started being irritated because he would lay up in the bed and bitch.
Okay, switch.
So the last time it happened, I walked out of the bathroom, it was a 1-bedroom apartment, I slept in the living room. So I came out of the bathroom, and he was Dale, I am really fed up.
Going arrows to the neighbor's dog. Oh, yeah.
I have a people right
There's an abundance.
I understand this is
They're genius for exercise.
you're out. We had this beautiful crazy engineering bikes. And this is down there, all these cars. And he had this kids in chemistry function on this stage, you know. And at the end here, as I said, I said, your cars. year out here, I took this
And China does
as hard as I could. Hit the fence on the other side of the
30 seconds.
times.
That's
And then later, he was gone. Later, I said, Dale, come over to my apartment.
It's frustrating.
There are companies, there's one in California that has
It was very easy, you know. I mean, a few days later, I calmed down and I actually told him, I said, look, don't just move out of here in a hurry because, you know, we have a fight. I said, take your time, take a couple of weeks, whatever it takes you to find, you know. He was gone with it.
You ready to share some ideas? We got a few I heard.
My steps I can take.
Cut down my ornamental trees and plant
The physical
Plant.
plant fruit trees. Cut down the others and plant fruit trees.
I would venture plant trees.
Is that how you spell berry?
V-E-A-R.
And the bear.
It's falling off the walls. What are you talking about?
Totally neglected also.
I like this.
Okay, great. Anything else?
Yes.
Catchment basins for their rainwater.
Rainwater catchment.
I even take the water out of my baptist.
Okay, so that's an industry that's really developing. I don't know if you can all hear me.
Yeah, with buckets.
What it really is
probably come down.
You guys are so great.
Oh, we are listening.
So someone mentioned rainwater catchment.
Yeah.
Do you know where you can get that?
No.
Get what?
Rainwater catchment systems? Okay, so there are some companies, there's one called Wonder Water in Mount Shasta. There are a lot of companies coming up, actually, and there are a lot of systems and ways to do that. What's interesting is the industry is mostly working in the third world because they need it right now, right? They don't have taps that they turn on. It's also a system that's used and perfected in the Orcas Islands and that area, in San Juan Islands, because they don't have a lot of running water. So if you look for areas in the world where they have to use rain catchment, like I went to an eco village, Huehue, Coyotel in Mexico last year, all of their water is rain catchment. They have a rainy season and a dry season. And by the end of the dry season, you're using the dregs of last year's rain. Wow. So they have to purify it too. But they got it down to a science.
Bermuda also.
Yeah, there's a lot of places. So if you get online and start looking, there's a lot of technology out there for rainwater catchment. What we need to do is create a system in our city where that is allowed and supported.
Would there be a problem just doing it on our own?
No, it is not illegal. There are some communities who have made it illegal because they assume that any water that falls from the sky belongs to everyone, and so you cannot collect it for your own good. So we don't want to go there. Because, it's dirty enough when it rolls down your roof and goes into your rain catchment, but if it goes through the sewer system, it's not the smartest move. Anyway, there are a lot. So if you need if you go on my website, I have some links to that, or just call me. And I think what I'm going to do is actually type this up and put it on my website somewhere so people can look at it.
Does anybody know that the freight train doesn't even run through Ashland?
No, yeah, we don't use the train hardly at all, and we really could be using
It
it.
stopped just recently. It used to
Yeah.
come twice a day.
It used to go twice a day,
Seemed
yeah.
awfully quiet out in town at 11 o'clock
Yeah.
at night.
But the good news is the tracks are there. We can use them when we want to. Yeah.
Another important thing is to network about people who are oriented the same way.
Yes.
Or similarly.
Yes.
Like-minded people.
Yeah.
And to try to convince the ones that aren't that, guess what, it's really happening. Because a lot of people don't believe it.
Yeah.
We're such a small minority. There's less than 1% of the people have an interest in actually putting these measures into effect.
Well, I think if it's
Yeah.
easy enough, I think more people would do it.
I think so. I think that's a major point. Yeah, is that if it's easy and affordable, Because if you ask yourself, when you're doing it, you feel great. You know you're taking care of not only yourself, but everyone you love and the planet. Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't ignoring you.
I don't agree with you at all. I mean, I've lived in so many different places, and I've met so many people in just different situations and different backgrounds, and they're all doing different things to try and cope with this, because it's kind of like the problem that, like, the politicians kind of see that's there, but I think the people that are actually living on the grounds and dealing with the situation, like the gas prices and with, like, food and all of that's going up, I see so many people taking action. Like, it's crazy. I used to live in Berkeley, and I helped build a co-op down there, and, like, there are all these community action groups that are springing up there around Oakland, around Richmond, like, in places you would never suspect. There are people doing stuff. So I think, like, sometimes you may feel hopeless and think like you're the only one, but I can tell you, you're not alone. Like, this isn't just like, oh, I'm, a young liberal person. I mean, I'm talking about, like, Republicans. Like, my dad's a gun-toting Republican. He's doing it. I mean, there's so many different people that are, like, on the stream.
Yep.
So.
For different reasons,
Yeah.
but they're still doing it, Wait just a sec. Go ahead.
I was in Berkeley recently, just a couple weeks ago, and I noticed the same thing. Everywhere you go, there's something about ecology and I bought these gorgeous shopping bags at Whole Foods for 99 cents. I bought 4 of them. They're like bags, and they're made like 85% from recycled plastic soda bottles or something. 99 cents, they're not designed to last forever, but
Those are available here too, at
Yeah.
Shopping Cart and Winco.
Yeah.
And, the
But
grocery outlet.
the one thing I wanted to say is the woman I stayed with, who I've known for years, she told me there's a water shortage in Berkeley. They're talking about water rationing, and she only takes a shower every 2 or 3 days for less than 5 minutes. Now, I thought that was a bit drastic.
The
Being a
governor,
female.
the governor of California has declared a water emergency.
Only you Americans have to shower every day. What's up with that?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
okay to smell like a human.
I didn't shower today. Do I smell?
No, you don't. So, go ahead, Frederick.
Just a subset of the network is sharing success stories.
Yes, yes. And in fact, and I want to actually share one more idea that they have. Let me write that down.
How about bathing with a friend?
I like that one. So I got to share one of the great ideas they have in the Transition 10 book. They've been doing this for 2 years, brainstorming with how can we get people engaged. They've come up with brilliant ideas, and one of them is that they tell stories about the future. They write newspaper articles that are dated 2011, 2015, 2020, about what life looks like now. But they're hilarious. So my favorite one, you can find the picture in the book. It shows a woman. She's holding a bottle, looking very proud, and it says liquid gold on it. Right? And how many people know the best source of nitrogen for compost if you don't have access to oil, petroleum?
Cows. No.
Pee.
You got it.
Manure.
Human pee.
Right.
Best source of nitrogen there is. Human pee. So what do? We flush it down into our drinking water. So not the smartest move. So she had this whole business that she conjured up where she managed to go to the urinals in the pub and, and do the plumbing so that they collected all the urine. And then they bottled it and sold it, right?
Fertilizer.
It's called liquid gold.
Liquid.
Now, this is not real. She made this up as a solution and people were having so much fun. They were just howling, coming up with all these ideas. This is where you take it into the lighthearted space.
Hospitals have tons of
Yeah.
gold.
Well, theirs have drugs in them. You don't want to use that.
Highly
Yeah.
drug contaminated.
Yeah.
How about convincing our local Ashland paper to print like once a month a column like that?
That'd be great. In fact, I'm approaching them to see if I can write one.
Good.
And I also wanted to address something that you had said. One of my jobs is I review the outputs for Gaia University students all over the world. I'm one of the graders, and they attract people who are world changers. They're actually on the ground doing stuff all over the world. And these are, I mean, half the time I'm in tears just reading the brilliant things these people are doing. And I gotta tell you, there are huge numbers of people around the world active, all over. And really in creative ways beyond our imagining. It really is taking over everybody's heart and minds right now. It's beautiful. So I want to get that down. So what was it you said? Write articles?
Yeah, convince the local paper to print articles.
Articles.
Like make it a monthly column or something.
Yeah.
Weekly. Daily. Yeah.
The
daily
survival
the
tips.
green column.
Survival.
Green column with practical and/or humorous
Writing numbers.
solutions to our
Practical.
green challenges.
Really? Really?
Greentopia.
Real practical and/or humorous solutions to our green conundrum.
Greentopia.
I like the way you write well. You can submit those yourself. A conundrum. I like that. That's a good word. Anything else? Yeah.
I'd like to encourage people to rip up their lawns and plant food.
Yes.
Because it's an insane waste.
Yes.
Like, it's crazy because I'm really into the Clean Water Act. It's like my saving grace that makes school worthwhile for me. But when you understand what the chemicals and the pesticides and all the crazy stuff that you put on your grass and then you water it and then it goes down the drain, what it does, and it's not even producing food.
And then we spray poison on it, so you can't really sit on it either.
Yeah, I'm like, what's grass for?
There's a house where they've done that on Hellman Street. When you come up from the bike path before you get to Hersey Street on the left side coming up, there's a house where they have raised beds. They've torn out the lawn and there's raised wood.
I'm
vegetable.
doing that too in my house.
I'm going to too.
I permacultured my whole yard, and what I did is sheet mulched. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but it's a way to grow your soil, because you have to actually grow the soil first before you can grow plants.
What?
Our soil is
So depleted.
depleted. So you have to actually build the soil first and get all the microorganisms that are supposed to be there back in there, all the little worms and bacteria and everything that if you study anything about how soil and plants work together, it's a very intricate, very complex live system down there, and we tend to kill it quite easily. So one of the things you can do if you want to get rid of your lawn is sheet mulch, which is you take cardboard and you just layer it all over, and then you put some manure or some kind of a green, something that's going to break down, and then you put other layers, and you go that deep. And then when you plant, you just cut into it and plant into it. And I started last fall, and my front yard is very, very rich now.
Where'd you learn how to do that?
It's a permaculture technique, and I'm certified in permaculture. But
There's a program
we get
happening.
classes here. I get classes. There's a lot of ways to learn.
This next week, Ashland Sanitary is having I think it's next Saturday, having
Mulch. Compost.
composting, and they'll give people, if you go there, give you a composter. Next Saturday, I think from 10 to 12.
Is that one of those round black things and you can turn it around?
Probably.
No,
I
they're
saw
very
those
very
at the
expensive.
Hopkins.
No,
recently.
more like
Just sits on the
just
black
a
plastic thing
standing
with holes in it
round
that can
black
just-
trash can
Yes,
type
probably,
looking
yes.
thing.
You
But
can
it
also grow
separates.
worms. Worms are one of the and they're so easy. I have them growing in my laundry room. I have a worm bin. It's about this big.
Vermiculture.
It's vermiculture. And I mean,
Ground up newspaper could be
these little
used.
guys reproduce so fast that you can't, and there's tea that comes out, goes into a container. And except when you're first putting it in, it doesn't smell. And if you dig it in and then bury it and cover it over, you don't smell it.
When we were over in Coquille, we had a really big yard that we didn't use for much, and we wanted to compost, and we were lazy. I mean, we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, so my husband came up with this great idea. He dug a hole in the ground, and then he took a plastic garbage can and cut the bottom off of it. Because first he had a board over it, but the raccoons were getting under the board and tearing it up. So then he came up with this idea. He took a regular, big plastic garbage can. He cut the bottom off and he stuck that down into the ground and then put a rock on the lid. And so then he would just lift up the lid and put the garbage, the garbage in there. And then when it would get full, he would just pull out the plastic thing and dig another hole and stick it somewhere else in the yard. And so we don't live there anymore, but she's going to have a great garden space there when all that stuff, is done fermenting or whatever it does.
If you want to accelerate that a little bit, permaculture is looking at how nature does it and then tweaking it a little so it goes faster. So if you want to accelerate that, you inoculate it with some mushrooms and you throw some worms in and then you cover it. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to answer any questions that they want. I know you've been holding a couple. Can we go to you after him?
Sure.
Okay, great.
First question I have has to do with solar panels. I'm asking these questions to see if you have the expertise about it. What is the carbon cost
Of producing them?
in the creation of solar panels?
It's quite high.
This is the same question I asked 30 years ago at Stanford University when it came to how much energy was being saved with microelectronics. I asked the question, how much energy is being spent to create microelectronics?
Yep.
So same question applies to solar panels.
This is what you're talking about. There's a term called emergy. Emergy is looking at the actual amount of energy that's used in the entire cycle of producing something. And so, and there's two examples down below. You have a lump of wood and you have a book, and you're cold and you need to burn one. Which one do you burn? Well, there's a lot of energy that went into producing that book. They're both going to give you heat, but probably burning the wood is a better choice if you're looking at the overall energy usage.
But what do you know? How much does it take to create solar panels
Yeah, I can't pull that up.
in relationship to the amount of electricity?
It's quite high, and that's being addressed right now because people are finally catching on to what you noticed years ago.
Because, a lot of energy goes into just creating silicon
That's right.
ingots.
That's right. And in fact,
Huge furnaces.
there's one school of thought that if you want solar panels, you should probably get them soon.
Well, wouldn't it have to do with how long they last? I mean, if they last 40 years or your whole
Yeah.
lifetime, then the upfront cost and energy expenditure is going to be worth it. If they break down and
Exactly.
fall apart after 5 years, then
Typical end of life is 25 years these days.
And the technology is changing, though. They're going into nanotechnology with solar. They're doing a lot of
Yeah.
stuff. So that's why it's so complex a question to answer. I can't answer that right now. You'd have to Google that to get that information.
All right.
There's companies who produce films you can put on windows. Imagine all these huge skyscrapers. Every single window can collect sun energy.
Yes, that's right. And in your roof, too.
And yeah, the whole building can be just a huge,
Yeah,
you can still look out the
there
window.
could be other ways besides solar panels
Right.
to collect
And that's
energy.
nano energy and there's
Carbon
companies who-
nanotubes could be used. They're using them on microelectronic level to pump in coolant onto microelectronic circuits.
Would you mind if I just pointed out the bottom of this slide too?
Sure.
Because this is a perfect example of switching our mindset. So they did a study in Britain looking at how they handle recycled paper, and they realized that it might be more energy efficient to actually just burn it and use the heat instead of recycling it. But then David Holmgren, who's one of the co-creators of the permaculture movement, said, well, you know what, if you just took the recycled paper and put it on your garden and sheet mulched, that's a much, but see, that takes a huge mind shift.
Feed it to your worms.
Yes.
Yes. What about the bleach in the
Taking
paper?
trees and putting them back in the ground.
What about the bleach in the
Almost
paper?
all, well, it depends on whether it's bleached or not, but that's a very small amount compared to what the soil has to deal with from the air and everything else.
Doesn't contain lead or something?
No,
All right,
well, actually, most of our inks are soy-based now, so it's not as bad a problem as it used to be. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, you had another question,
You
right?
do have another question since the theoretical length of time is running out?
Yes, it is.
Number 10 of the 12 steps earlier, you remember what that was?
Respect the elders?
But we could look.
You sound like a college professor, Steve.
Use and value.
Somebody remembered what it was.
Use and value diversity. Oh, excuse me, these are the, this is the way that, you guys didn't get to see this, did we, Anna?
I think it was respect the elders.
The 12-step program of Rob Hopkins.
Yes, there you go.
Number 10,
Number 10,
honor your elders.
yes.
I would change that to something like honor your ancestors, whether they are alive or not.
Honor the wise elders.
Now, from one point of view, all of the fossil fuels that exist on planet Earth are there because they represent the energy that was absorbed and transformed
That's right.
by all living entities that existed prior to current times. How is it honoring our ancestors, whether they are human beings or otherwise, by taking them from their grave sites, if you will, and transforming them to some purpose of our very limited period of time of satisfying some need on the planet?
Plastic bags is a
Well,
perfect example.
I don't know how to answer that question because it's not an answerable question. I think your point is really a beautiful one. And when we go fill up the car, you know, we talk about, oh, let's go fill up with dead dinosaurs.
I just raised the question. I'm not
Because I want my
necessarily
daughter
wanting
to
an
really
answer.
Get that connection, you know? Yeah, and you know, there could be an underlying assumption that the dinosaurs would care what you did with their molecules or
It
not.
wasn't just the dinosaurs, there was a lot more
I know.
biomass otherwise.
I know. But I love the holistic way that you're looking at that. And that is definitely part of honoring elders and ancestors and the entire, you know.
Honor the world.
Well, it's
Mother
the
Nature.
hologram of life, you know,
Right.
that's on this planet, really.
Well, this is kind of getting back to Ashland again. I would like to know how to deal with deer, the deer, because I've seen the people who have the raised beds in their front yards, and they have to build these humongous fences around, and it's just a total nuisance. And, well, I come from Maine, and in Maine, we shoot the deer and we eat them. You know, it's part
Which is
of
one
the.
solution.
It's a part of, well, you know, I want to know, like, how people in Ashland feel about, I don't see that they contribute one thing to the community. I really don't think they belong here. They don't really seem to have any natural predators.
Well, that's because we killed
They're
them.
total nuisances.
I just found a leg of a deer really close to town, all chewed up.
Two of my sister and her daughter both have been automobile accidents because they were crossing Siskiyou Boulevard at dusk and totaled their freaking cars.
We do have a problem with deer.
And I say, kill them all.
I have several answers to that. I can give you.
Something you can spray on that
Then
vegetation.
how are you gonna grow food?
I have several answers for you on that, but I want to hear.
Sorry, that's how I feel.
If you want to spray your plants with neem, they don't like it.
Neem, yes,
Yeah.
neem from India, yeah.
Yeah.
That's one source. There's a couple things in the permaculture world, they deal with that a lot. And there are people who actually graft, that they'll take a tree around the border, they'll put a hedgerow around the border of the property. And on one side of the hedge, they'll graft on the variety of whatever that plant is that the deer like. And on the side facing into the yard, they graft on the kind that the humans like. And that tends to keep the deer on one side. So that's one solution.
They don't like bay laurel and they can't eat oleander.
But neither can humans. But there's another way, and this may sound weird, but I've been working with this for a long time. The land I'm on right now, I've lived on for 22 years. And when I first moved here, I dealt with this a lot. We had a garden space with a 3-foot fence. And, you know, and I'm up there, so that the deer were everywhere, you know. And I finally decided I was going to try a new solution. So I actually communicated with the deer. And
Good idea.
I cut a deal with them. And I said, okay, this is the deal. You can have all the fruit and nut tree stuff that you can reach, but you can't go into my garden, which had a 3-foot fence, and you can't eat my roses. And they kept that agreement for 8 years. And
Then what happened?
Then I got ready to get divorced, and they told me my energy was off by mowing down my garden.
They started eating your roses like
3
crazy.
times that
Either
summer.
that or all the deer you made the agreement with died, because they
No,
were 8 years
you know,
old, they had to start
Because it
over.
was 8 years, I actually made the agreement, and it was held, And I have a similar agreement with the Black Widows. I mean, there are ways that we haven't even begun to explore for humans to live. We are part of this environment, we're not outside of it. And there are ways for us to relate to each other that is totally imbalanced. And but one of the rules of that is you actually have to offer them something. It has
Strike
to
a
be reciprocal.
contract with
One-way
them.
ticket up to the woods or something.
Well, and then I'll give you the answer that the permaculture teacher gave us when we had this conversation in our class. He said, the solution to the deer in Ashland is to designate an Ashland hunter. That is a city-paid employee,
Whoa.
and then,
Pay them with deer meat.
no,
hunting
then you
season.
feed people with the deer meat.
Yeah, you have a hunting season.
We have an imbalance here, and it's very
It's too
bad.
many.
It's very, normally we would not have this problem. And in fact, if you notice in October, more deer come down because they know it's hunting season.
Yeah.
So they hang out right in town even more. And
What would you do about all the kids that go hiking?
Obviously, it's gonna have to be someone who's very skilled and very careful,
Sure.
But that's one way to keep citizens from dealing with it, by having someone who is skilled and knows what they're doing.
Is there such a person now?
No.
Oh.
No, so that would be something.
Someone who will kill the deer compassionately.
Compassionate.
How about releasing more mountain lions?
Well,
You think deer are a problem?
people are scared of the mountain lions. It's a deal bit. I teach kids all the time, and it is amazing to me. I will say to them, where do lions live? Africa? Everyone, Africa? I go,
Zoo.
what about in your backyard? There's lions here. They're right here. We're part of their habitat. And yet it's not even part of the consciousness of the people here, or it's a fearful reaction. Without seeing that, no, there's a balance here.
That could be changed too,
It
maybe.
could, absolutely. And in fact, about, I don't know, what was it, 10 years ago, they voted to stop hunting with dogs, because what they were doing was hunting the cougars and trapping them in trees and then shooting them. So people are starting to notice the imbalance and do something about it, and we need to be active about that. Use your voice.
One way to keep the deer away, use mountain lion urine.
Yes, and actually I've heard that cow blood, someone told me, works too.
Well, okay, maybe not.
Those little sidetrack.
Yep.
It's been a problem.
It is a problem, and we need to acknowledge it. Really, it's a sign of the imbalance of the whole ecosystem.
Plastic netting is a petroleum product,
It
so.
sure is, and I just bought some
That
today.
doesn't last that long.
No.
they can
Any other
do it.
questions? Because we're actually a little over time, I think. Thank you all.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.